Swedish Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tobias Billström, and the High Representative and Vice President, Josep Borrell. This press conference will be held in English. There is Swedish and French interpretations available. When you ask a question, please state your name and media outlet. Minister Billström, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Today we hosted 58 ministers and representatives from the Indo-Pacific and the EU. We also welcomed partners for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, the US, the UK and Canada. I'm grateful to those who made very long journeys to join us, in particular Fiji and Vanuatu in the Pacific. I'm also grateful that the chairs of the G7, the G20, ASEAN and the African Union, namely the foreign ministers of Japan, India, Indonesia and Comoros, chose to come. I also thank France for hosting the first EU Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum. Today's forum has demonstrated that there is very strong momentum in the EU Indo-Pacific partnerships. Our discussions have revealed that together we are strong enough to make a real difference on free trade, climate change and climate action and broad security. Our deliberations also showed firm support for the rules-based international order. We talked about the serious consequences of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I note the strong attachment among partners to the UN Charter and, for example, the law of the sea. We also discussed cooperation on cybersecurity, economic security and maritime security, as well as human security, such as pandemic and natural disasters. I believe it was clear that there is a huge potential in economic cooperation. The EU has the most ambitious free trade agenda of any major economy, and we are moving forward with several partners in the Indo-Pacific. I also want to highlight the potential for cooperation on the green transition and digitalisation, not at least the EU's digital partnerships. On climate action, I think that we were all struck by the testimonials of the small island states who are already today fighting for their existence against rising seas. The EU is firmly committed to the Paris Agreement and working together on mitigation and adaptation. I'm very happy that the implementation of the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific is moving forward rapidly, and that the political dialogue today at this forum has contributed to laying the foundation for further progress. I also would like to mention that I have taken the opportunity today to hand over Sweden's application to join the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation to Retno Marsudi, the Foreign Minister of Indonesia and chair of ASEAN. This is a concrete measure to further enhance ASEAN's centrality in the Indo-Pacific. For Sweden, we also look beyond our presidency. Our commitment remains. We have much to contribute on innovation, green transition and broad security, but to name a few. I look forward to advancing the EU Indo-Pacific agenda in years to come. I now hand over to the High Representative, the Vice President, Josep Borrell, whose work as co-host has been invaluable. Thank you very much, Josep. It has been so good cooperating on this project together with you and the Commission.
Yes, it has been very good to be us. I thank you a lot. You have heard me quite a lot of times during those days. You heard my intervention in the opening and the closing sessions of the forum. So I shall be brief, but I have to thank you. I have to thank the Swedish presidency and you in particular, Minister, and everybody. I know that tens of people, maybe hundreds of people have been mobilized, from the interpreters to the waiters to everybody who has been making possible this big event. I know by the experience that it's quite difficult, and you have been very successful on the organization of this forum. Well, you brought together 58 states 58 participants from the European Union and from the Indo-Pacific region, coming from very far away. And this is a moment in which the forum is becoming something that is here to stay. The second edition, I think it has been more open to the dialogue. I remember last year forum took place just on the eve of the starting of the war in Ukraine. We were in Paris, and the following day the war started. And now 1 year the aggression continues, and I think it has created a different momentum, even for our relations with the Indo-Pacific people. Our relation reflects this new reality and maybe the feeling that the world needs more cooperation to face this challenging situation. Before launching the forum, by the way, our Indo-Pacific partners were receptive to Minister Kuleva, who had the opportunity to address them and convey concrete messages on the situation in Ukraine. And from our Indo-Pacific partners, I think that we heard a clear message of solidarity and a strong commitment to the United Nations Charter. The Indo-Pacific region and the European Union are neighbors. You would say neighbors? No, they are very far away. Well, we are neighbors. We are so interlinked that we are economically, certainly we are neighbors, and not only economically. From a geopolitical point of view, or from the security point of view, we are very close. Cooperation between us and the Indo-Pacific must be a two-way relationship, and the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, when she claimed that they want the Pacific to remain Pacific, remember that the name Pacific was given to the Pacific by the Spaniards, who were surprised by quite calm the waters were, and they called that Pacifico, Pacific. Well, our neighbors from the Pacific want the Pacific to remain a space of peace. After the Second World War was the space of wars, proxy war, Korea, Vietnam. Now they want to keep the waters calm, as Pacific as they were when, for the first time, the Europeans went through these waters. Our friend Eno from Indonesia used a keyword, collaboration. I want to add another one, connectivity. We have to increase our connectivity. We have to get closer to each other, to listen more and better each other. We need concrete issues and concrete actions. And allow me to remember that we have already done quite a lot. We have signed partnerships and cooperation agreements with Malaysia and Thailand. We have opened new trade and investment opportunities, concluding free trade agreement with New Zealand, negotiating new ones with Australia, with India, with Thailand, with Indonesia, and with Kenya. We have established digital partnership with Japan, with the Republic of Korea, and with Singapore. By the way, today many address the digital divide and the challenges that represent the fact that being or not being digitalized means a new divide between people, new sources of inequality. The State Minister of the United Arab Emirates stressed the importance of fighting against the digital divide, and that's why these digital partnerships are so important. And also on security and defense, we are starting building concrete partnerships with many of the countries in the region, starting with Japan and Korea, because the European Union is also a security provider. We have to continue advancing on many fields, we have signed this comprehensive transportation agreement, which is an important part of our connectivity purposes. Operation Atalanta has extended its task from the coast of Somalia down to the African coast, increasing their cooperation with partners in the region. So we did a lot in this last year, and on the year that starts today, we'll do more. We have 20 priority projects of our global gateway that will provide the strategic investment in infrastructure in the region. And this initiative will be key to support our Indo-Pacific partners to face the existential threats posed by climate change, for example. So let's use this momentum, because certainly I felt that here in Stockholm it was a certain momentum. Maybe because the war is facing more challenges, and the war is something that affrights all of us. All of us, we want peace. And this has been a remarkable meeting. Thank you once again. Let's start continue working with this part of the world that will be the scenario of the history on the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we open up for questions. Yes, we have Swedish radio, please. Hi.
My name is Naila Salim. I'm the South Asia correspondent for Swedish Radio, and I have two questions for the High Representative and Vice President, please. First one, so the topic of today is the EU-Indo-Pacific relationship and cooperation, and we have many representatives from the region, and yet Ukraine remains the big topic of today. Would you please comment on that?
I understand. No, it's difficult for me to understand. If you put the micro closer.
Oh, do you want me to say it?
Oh, there is a. Look, there is a.
Okay, again.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, so sorry. Naila Salim, South Asia correspondent for Swedish Radio. So the first question is that the topic of today is the EU-Indo-Pacific relationship and cooperation. And yet, and we have so many representatives from the countries here, and yet the main topic remains Ukraine. How do you comment on that? And the second question would be, what kind of concrete results have been achieved regarding China's enhanced position in the Indo-Pacific, which is a real concern for the countries there? Thank you.
Well, no, Ukraine is an important issue, but I wouldn't say that this forum has been devoted to Ukraine. No, not at all. Minister Kuleva was invited. He addressed to the members of the forum, but I don't agree with you. We have talked about Ukraine, but marginally. We have been talking about Indo-Pacific relations. Certainly for us, Ukraine is an existential problem, and everything is related to Ukraine. But today, sorry to say, we haven't been talking only about Ukraine. In Spanish, they would say, niego la mayor. Je refuse la prémise. Je refuse l'a priori. Et la deuxième question, c'était quoi, la deuxième question? China, sì. Well, we haven't talked about China a lot, neither. Ukraine and China certainly were the subjects of our gimmick yesterday. Maybe you make reference to our meeting yesterday, because yesterday, yes, we talked about China and Ukraine. But today, no. Certainly, you talk about the Indo-Pacific, China is there. But I don't see that we have been discussing a lot about China, at least not in the roundtable event. Maybe you have to make reference to our Foreign Affairs Minister yesterday. No?
We will have another question then. Yes.
Alexander Maxia, Agenzia ANSA, Italy. Yesterday, when talking about the EU-China relations, you emphasized differences in values, with a focus on, quote, individual and collective human rights. When making economic and political ties with countries in the Indo-Pacific, will human rights be an important aspect to emphasize even there? And if so, how is the European Union planning to do so? And also Sweden. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Human rights is an issue at any moment for the European Union. It's part of our ADN. And in every time that we have a relationship with a third country, we discuss about human rights. I mentioned clearly that one of the problems of the region is the fact that there are authoritarian regimes, some of them were not here in particular, that pose a problem for the security. You understand very well to whom I am referring. And yes, human rights is a big issue in the region, and we discuss about it, and it's part of our relationship.
Yeah, I can only add to what the High Representative said. I mean, countries like Myanmar, like Afghanistan, where you could also put women's rights into a context, where I think you could find a lot of examples where the EU is very much engaged on the question of enhancing human rights and have a political dialogue with countries who are also concerned about these matters within the Indo-Pacific family.
We have a question here for the man in the middle.
Hi, Finbar Birmingham here from the South China Morning Post newspaper from Hong Kong. The representative from the Pacific Islands who moderated the session on security described it as sobering. When we had the opportunity to ask some questions to ministers on their arrival, we did pick up on some real big differences in how they viewed situations pertaining to Ukraine. For example, you mentioned that there was alignment on the UN Charter, but some of the ministers were saying that the fighting should stop immediately, rather than the broad European view that Zelensky's peace plan is the only solution for this. I just want to get the take from the High Representative about perhaps the differences of opinion on thorny geopolitical issues between your Indo-Pacific partners, and whether you've had any success in maybe convincing them of what the European Union's point of view is when it comes to creating peace in Ukraine. Thank you.
Look, the issue, the purpose was not to convince them. We are not in a crusade. The issue was for them to have the opportunity to listen to the representative of a country who is traveling around the world. He was coming from Latin America, attending another meeting in order to get information firsthand of the causes and consequences of the war. But we particularly, we don't want to convince anyone. We would just want to share analysis of the causes and consequences of the war. And I know perfectly, I knew before coming here, that several members of the Indo-Pacific region are in a position which is not the European position with respect to the war. Clearly not. And I had the opportunity to exchange, for example, with my friend, the Indian Foreign Minister, about the prospects. He had been meeting recently with Minister Lavrov. This gathering is also an opportunity for us to share what do we know about what's going on. And unhappily, I think that everybody shares the same concern. And the concern is that the war will continue.
And I can only add to what
this is a serious concern that we share. No? And everybody wants the war to stop. Yes, but it depends how.
I can only add that the purpose, of course, of this was to create political dialogue between the countries of Indo-Pacific and the EU. And one of the most most prominent things when we talk about this is the fact that everybody underlines that peace is a requirement for prosperity. Without peace, there cannot be prosperity. And from this follows that the fact that all countries I've heard who have taken the floor has underlined their respect for the UN Charter is a very strong testimony to the platform where we all stand. The fact that Minister Kuleba had the opportunity to also engage in dialogue with many states, both at the table but also in bilaterals, is also a way for us to enhance our views. The views of the European Union are well known. The High Representative have many times outlined them, how we feel about the war, but engaging in dialogue is the only way forward with countries who are not yet fully committed on the same side where we are.
Thank you. We will take a follow-up from Swedish radio.
That's the end? No? Another question? Yes, please. For sure.
It's the last one.
So a follow-up question. I'm wondering about how you can discuss the Indo-Pacific without China and the importance of an inclusive dialogue to get a political dialogue and move forward.
We can perfectly discuss about Indo-Pacific without China. Which is the problem? In fact, we have been discussing about the Indo-Pacific. Each cada momento, I think I'm escaping to Spanish. Each moment has its opportunity. There are places and moments to discuss with China.
Very true.
That concludes our press conference for today. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the interpreters.
Había alguien allí que quería preguntar. I don't want to frustrate anyone. I think that you were also willing to.
So we will do a final question.
Thank you. Nicholas Rolando from Bloomberg. My question was a bit on the same track as Naila Salim's. On where does China fit into this? Because obviously it's the elephant in the room, and it is an important issue for all of these countries. And the EU strategy says that it's a partner, an economic competitor, and a systemic rival. So where does China fit in this discussion? Is this about building Europe as a stronger alternative to China in the region?
No, we don't have this ambition. It would be completely out of question being an alternative to China. No, look, the Indo-Pacific is a broad region that goes from the coast of Africa to the coast of the US, with the middle of islands and the 50 countries. We have been now 60 countries gathering together. I think that we can discuss about a lot of things without having China. It doesn't mean that we don't count on China. It's impossible not to count on China. But there are places in which we can discuss about our common interest without having to have China among us. It doesn't mean that we neglect China. That doesn't mean that we want to substitute China. It doesn't mean anything about China. But there are moments in which the Indo-Pacific region, which exists, and the European Union, that also exists, that we have links, we have complementarities, we have common endeavors, we have common projects. We work together to discuss about it. No? I don't see where the problem is.
And I can maybe also add that the invitation to this, or the invitations in plural to this Stockholm Indo-Pacific EU Indo-Pacific Ministerial Forum, that reflects the invitation for last year's Paris meeting. It's the same kind of group that has been invited. And as far as China is concerned, well, the EU already had a set of dedicated dialogues and structured relations with China on a variety of subjects: trade, climate, development, human rights, not to be fisheries, ocean governance, etc. And that takes place at various institutional levels. The member states have a dialogue. We have a strategic dialogue, and we also have a high-level dialogue with China. We don't lack dialogues with China, I would like to say, from the EU. But on this, in this setting, just as the High Representative said, the aim has been to engage with the countries of the Indo-Pacific, and there have been many, as we have seen.
But there's nothing against China. The fact that China was not here is nothing against China. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.